Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another day of Moz in the Scratic. The hashtag Moz in the Scratic. I don't know how to start my videos. Scrap busting ephemera making challenge that I'm hosting this month for the month of January, where we are using up the scraps in our scratic. If you're just joining me now, that's what it is. It's a scrap attic, where we keep all of our scraps. We're clearing out the old scraps. We can make space for the new ones for the new year. And today is day 20. I don't know. I had to go look at the list. It's day 20, and we're doing a pattern. Pattern is the prompt for day 20. And I figured for this prompt in particular, I would show you guys the easiest way to use up scraps, which I think we all be knowing, and some of us be knowing more than others, but sometimes we forget. But the easiest way to use up scraps is to make a collage board. Also known as a masterboard, but I don't like the connotations of that. And I know I featured masterboards on my channel here ages and ages ago, but I now use the term collage board. So if you're wondering what the difference is, there is no difference. It is the same thing. But yeah, we're making a collage board, and so I have been giving myself the additional challenge of using all these extra plain scraps from my scrap pile, because it is the only scraps I actually have. I have a little tiny like baggie full of scraps that are like patterned or more interesting than plain paper, but my goal whenever I make a journal or like a book in general is to like craft down to the last scrap. So I will not call it a finished project until I have used up the majority of the scraps that I have, until I have little tiny pieces that are like unusable, like stuff that I'm comfortable tossing away. So what's happened is I usually don't have scraps, because when I started out in my junk journal journey, I would have a huge box underneath my desk that was just piled to the top of scraps, and cool scraps, you guys, like not even just like plain paper, but I mean, like, we're talking the greatest scrapbook paper I've ever seen in my life was in this box. And what would happen is I would just continue to pile more and more scraps on top of it. And then by the time it came around to like, oh, I probably have this in my scrap pile, I would be so overwhelmed trying to find a single piece of paper that I remembered tossing in there that, like I would just get too frustrated to craft, because now I have to dig through this box all day until I find the right scrap. And yeah, the system wasn't working for me, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. So I made the big decision to let that box go, because what happened was that box got so full of scraps and I was not able to like craft to keep up with it, that I ended up starting a new box. So I had two boxes of scraps, and I was like, oh, no, 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 this isn't gonna work. And then I felt bad because I, buy more paper, because like, of course, crafting is a consumptive hobby. So you are consuming more and more materials to make your crafts. And so I would buy more paper, then I'd look at my scrap box and be like, figure out what to do. And like, my vibe in general isn't like fit for a lot of the stuff that I know that we like to do here in the junk journal community. Like commonplace books are not really my jam. I don't like when stuff is disjointed like that. I have a very like logical brain despite being a creative person. So I like when things make sense, and having to sort out scraps to fit whatever worked out just a little bit, like I was fine. I made a rainbow series of books where I used the colors that I sorted out from my scrap pile, and that kind of worked. But like, I don't want to do that all the time. I don't want to have to do that all the time. I want to have to do like a grand culling of my scraps. So after I started the second box, I was like, pump the brakes, we can't do this anymore. And also, I can't continue to justify buying more paper if I have this box of unseen paper. But also, like, as I have mentioned before, I have ADHD. So I've talked about it before, but there's this concept with ADHD called doom boxes, where you put stuff into a box, and then once you close it, you forget what's in there because of the lack of object permanence. So for me, like, that is currently the obstacle that I am dealing with in my craft space, because I have moved it so much that a lot of it's in boxes, and I don't know what I have anymore, which is why I'm doing this like major revamp of my crafting space, because I need to be able to see it. In order to use it, I have to be able to see it, or at least have easy enough access to it that it doesn't disappear into the void that is my mind palace, right? So my scrap box became kind of like a doom box, because I would just forget I'd forget about it entirely. Not just like that there was stuff in it, but I'd forget that it existed. And then I would look down and be like, oh, I could have dug through here to find scraps instead of starting a new piece of paper and creating more scraps. So that's when I was like, okay, this system doesn't work for me. I have to come up with a different system, because I want to keep buying pretty paper, but I don't want to keep wasting paper either. So then that's when I sort of switched to, okay, every time I make a journal and I like have a paper pack for it, I am going to use every scrap that I generate in the process of creation until I have little tiny bits that I'm okay letting go of. And that's just been my thing. So I'm very conscious when I am cutting apart papers and stuff for journals, that the pieces that are left over need to get used, but also that I don't want to cut any extra paper that I won't need, so like I try to make it a point to not cut too much or tear into a new piece of paper just for like one item, because I know that if I do that, then I have now created a scrap that I now need to craft with and create with, which has been really cool for myself. It's made me a lot more mindful of like how I'm using my papers and stuff like that. It's also given me the extra challenge of having to figure out what to do with all the scraps, and coming up with things to do with them. Collage boards like this being a prime example of what you can do when you have a lot of extra scraps and you don't really know what to do with them. They're a perfect way to use them up, and you can make a bunch really quickly. And then they're very versatile because like you don't just have to make tags. As you guys can see, I am making pockets, like a big floating pocket piece out of plain paper, which is cool. And I'm using my stamps to make the pattern. That was my whole point of the prompt. The prompt was the pattern was the stamping. But I don't even remember what I was saying. Oh my God. The ADHD just came through hard. So let me think. There was a whole point to all of this rambling. Oh my God. My brain is spaghetti strainer. So essentially, I, I make it a point to be mindful in my paper usage so that I don't end up with a bunch of pieces of paper that I can't use. But the problem is that over the summer I started doing mini albums, and what I have learned doing mini albums, that mini albums are incredibly wasteful. And unlike a junk journal where you can get away with like overstuffing a junk journal or being like, okay, yeah, I put a bunch of these scrappy little things together and tossed them in here, you can't really do that if you're making like a straight up mini album. You can if you're making like a more junk journal style mini album. You can be like, all right, I'm putting all these little bits of ephemera and stuff like that in here. But then you also have to make sure that you're accounting for the space in a mini album, because they're not really supposed to be crocodile, like gator mouthed. And they're also supposed to be like places that people put their photos and stuff in. So there needs to be more room so that they can put their things in there. As opposed to a journal where you're like, okay, well, they might put a couple photos or like prints or something in here, but for the most part, they're going to put the written word. So like I don't have to account for that much space when making a journal, and it's okay if the journal is a little bit extra chunky or over chunky. It's still usable as a journal. If I overstuff it, you can't really do that with a mini album. So when I was coming to the end of like my mini albums, I was like, oh my God, there is so much paper left over, and it stresses me out. It stresses me out because I know that if I don't use the pieces, they're not going to get used, and that's just going to be a bunch of waste, and I hate that because it's nice paper, it's pretty paper, I don't want to waste it. So what I've learned is, one, to package my scraps up differently. So as opposed to tossing them all into a like a box at the end of a mini album project, I've been rebagging like in a big giant like 4-gallon Ziploc bag, the paper pad with all the little scraps still with it so that they stay together on theme. So that this way, when I come back and I'm like, okay, I want to make a journal in this theme, I can go directly to this scrap pile that I have created from my mini albums and utilize those scraps right away, but also it's still with the original paper pad. So I'm not losing the sense of cohesion that I was losing by tossing everything into the scrap pile. Because it's still on the theme. It's still with the theme, if that makes sense. But also, I have approached it with the same level of mindfulness that I do for my journal practice. It's just not as easy to be like, okay, well, now I've hit the end of the project. I've made everything I want to make, but I have all these scraps left. I'll just make a bunch of collage boards, cut up a bunch of tags, toss them in there. I could do that, but then like the aesthetic would be different because it's a lot cleaner, neater, more precise aesthetic for mini albums. If I'm making like a junk journal style mini album, then yeah, I absolutely could do that. That's not a problem. But if I'm making just a regular mini album, I want it to be cleaner looking. So I can't just throw in a bunch of patchwork scrap together things that have like no real intention behind them, and then overstuff pockets because I want to use up that stuff. If that makes any sense, if this thought train is on track. So by bagging stuff up this way, I've managed to sort of manage the scrap nature of mini album construction and making. And like as I think I go on and get better at making mini albums, I might come up with a better way to do it as time goes by. But for right now, I just need to manage the scraps. And so the reason that I am doing this entire challenge with only plain paper scraps is that plain paper scraps was the largest scrap that gets generated by making mini albums. There's something crazy about like how the cutting process to just build the pages works, where you always have scrap paper left. And I have tried so hard, you guys, to come up with ways to not like overcut and waste paper in this process. And sometimes you just can't. If you need an 8.5 by 8.5 piece of paper and your papers come in 8.5 by 11, then you are going to have a piece of paper left over. And if you want to make traditional size photo mats, you have to go by traditional photo sizes, which isn't necessarily always going to be the scrap of paper that you have at the end. And yeah, that's what I've been learning doing this exploration into mini albums. So I am endeavoring to use up as much of these plain paper scraps. I already know at this stage in the game where I've been recording, I'm not going to use them all up in this challenge. I'm going to have to keep doing it, but we're going to come up with more fun, creative ways like this in order to use up these scraps. So I hope that you guys like this. I hope that like maybe this just gave you some insight into my brain and how I view scrap paper and stuff like that. And I hope that you guys check out the hashtag Moz in the Scratic and see what everybody else is up to. Check out the playlist in the description box below and come back tomorrow and see what I make then. Until then, guys, I appreciate your faces. Happy crafting and goodbye.